Ya. ¿Me puedes confirmar si estás recibiendo la interpretación en...
Sí,
Ok. ¿En, en qué? Vamos a... Sí, de nuevo, Luis. Sí, con la... para esperar la confirmación de Natasia también. De ambos canales. Vamos a empezar con el de inglés, por favor.
ok.
Uno, dos, probando sonido, prueba de sonido.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3 on the English channel. Testing, testing, 1,
Buenos días, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Ya estamos.
Good morning. We are getting ready to start our session.
Eduardo Arana, Ministro de Justicia y Derechos.
I'm Eduardo Antarana, the Minister of Justice. I'm joined by Jorge Chapardo for Policies for Defense.
Yes. Can I just check with the interpretation? Are we ready to begin?
Yes, we're ready to begin.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I now open hearing number 31 of the 180th period of sessions of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is entitled Follow-up to the Recommendations of the Report, Situation of Human Rights in Peru in the Context of Social Protest. My name is Roberta Clark, and I'm the second Vice President of the Commission, and I'm accompanied by my fellow Commissioner, Carlos Bernal, to my left. I'm also accompanied by the Executive Secretary of the Commission, Ms. Tanya Renon, and the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, Pedro Vaca. The purpose of this hearing is to receive information about the compliance measures that have been implemented by the state to comply with the recommendations of the Commission in the context of our visit carried out in 2023, as well as the pending challenges in terms of implementation. In particular, it is expected that we receive information and data on progress in terms of reparations and investigation of cases of human rights violations that were recorded by the Commission in the report on the situation of human rights in Peru in the context of social protest. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that we have a high-level delegation from the state of Peru, including the ambassador, the permanent representative to the OAS, the Vice Minister of Human Rights, the Minister of Health, and other senior persons representing the state. This, I think, signals the importance of this issue, as well as the significance of this hearing for the state. And we also have very robust representation of civil society organizations who are registered to participate. As we begin, and I will speak to you about how we're going to spend the hour and a half together, I want to emphasize that only persons who have been registered with civil society will be allowed to participate early in this hearing. And so how are we going to spend our time together? We will start with civil society organizations, where we have 24 minutes, and there will be a clock here, so you will see the time as it goes by. The state will have the same amount of time, 24 minutes. The Commission will have 12 minutes to respond and ask questions or make comments as they think appropriate. And then we go back to civil society for further 12 minutes, and the state 12 minutes, and then we conclude. I just want to say my note reminds me to say that civil society has 24 minutes, but you will divide that time amongst yourselves, but more or less 4 minutes per person speaking on behalf of civil society, if there are 6 of you. So we will rely on you to manage that. So with that, civil society, you have the floor. And I also want to remind you to speak not too fast, because the interpreters have to keep up, and just to be mindful of that.
Good morning. And Commission, Madam Executive Secretary, Rapporteur, colleagues from civil society, the illustrious representatives of the state. I am Florencia Rezende from CIDH, and I will be speaking on behalf of the regional and international organizations. Thank you very much for holding this important hearing. The organizations I'm representing are very concerned by the state of democratic institutions and rule of law in Peru. These undermine human rights. There have been grave violations committed between September 2022 and March 2023 throughout Peru. The Commission's report from last April talked about the need to strengthen the electoral system. That has been completely ignored by the Peruvian state. Sectors from Congress have taken reprisals against other democratic institutions. 6 of the 7 members of the Constitutional Tribunal were appointed, but there was no transparency. The candidates were not selected based on merit. In a decision in February of 2023, the court made it possible to have an ombudsperson. This figure is important for the defense of human rights. The Congress decided to choose someone without any experience on human rights who has devoted his time to dismantle rights. There's no judicial independence. The Congress disqualified for 5 years a prosecutor based on a decision made because of his interpretation of the law. Now Congress is trying to dismiss a justice council based on supposed very serious cases and a process that was not defined by law. Last Tuesday in Lima, there was an amparo action filed on behalf of this council, and they ordered the suspension of the process. A prosecutor opened a case against these prosecutors and accused them of noncompliance. If this council is dismantled, this will seriously impact the entity that appoints and selects prosecutors throughout Peru. If this council is left to political ideology, any congressperson who is being accused of corruption would be able to weigh in and ensure that their preferred candidates are selected to be prosecutors. Dina Boluarte's administration is an accomplice in the undermining of rights. There was a note from the UN that stated that the separation of powers was key. The state has been suspending basic rights. The weakening of institutions, including persecution of prosecutors who seek to bring to justice those accused of corruption, have led to precautionary measures by the Commission. The Commission's report establishes that there have been serious abuses during the marches. The government has denied any evidence of this. They have used stigmatizing rhetoric against those who took part in the protests, many of whom were indigenous. They have used the authorities have used lethal force. No investigations have been done to pinpoint the perpetrators of the violence. In its report, the Commission talks about a mechanism. We believe this needs to be an interdisciplinary group of independent experts. This will be necessary to support investigations and prosecutors who need forensic support and evidence. We urge the state to support the implementation of this group of experts so that they can implement the Commission's recommendations. And should the state fail to cooperate, we would ask the Commission to consider including Peru in Chapter 4B of its annual report. The state of Peru, the Commission, and the international community must act to prevent an even worse deterioration of rule of law in Peru. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the table. I'm Gloria Cano from a human rights organization, Peru. Thank you for this opportunity. We would like to talk about the investigations into military and police authorities into the protests that led to a number of deaths. In a recent report about Peru, where you talk about the increase of authoritarianism, most of those in the previous. The interpreter regrets that she is reading so quickly it is impossible to interpret.
Excuse me. Can I please ask you to speak a little bit more slowly?
Gracias.
It's not surprising that repression and those persons who were injured during the protests against the current president have taken place in areas where Castillo had the most political support and where the most marginalized communities in the country live, primarily indigenous and rural peoples. Nearly a year after all of this happened, only investigations about Ayacucho have been able to pinpoint a perpetrator of the deaths. In the rest of Peru, the investigations are still just beginning. On March 31st of this year, the Office of the Prosecutor decided to accumulate investigations into a single team. And they would have jurisdiction nationwide and have 5 days to do an inventory of the different cases and then 48 hours to send those case files to the Office of the Prosecutor that was coordinating this. And that deadline was not met. In Ayacucho, Naque, the team visited them in May and then in other areas in June. In Andacuaya and connected areas, Marlene Rojajara was appointed as head of the investigation. However, just a few weeks later, she stepped down and was replaced by Dene Diaz, who once again, after engaging in some actions, was replaced. So thus far, there have been 4 prosecutors who have been in charge of this without having been able to even conduct any sort of significant investigation. And the denial of the authorities to provide the prosecutors with any of the information they need have prevented the perpetrators from being identified. Then the investigations against the president and other ministers were resolved on behalf of the victims. A judge had the opportunity to question those who were being accused. President Baluarte, who stated at the beginning that she would be happy to respond to questions by the victims, refused to answer any questions. And the victims had to go to Lima to give their statements. So they asked the prosecutors to travel through Lima or to at least allow for virtual testimony. In these cases and others that we will share with this Honorable Commission, we can affirm that the state has failed to comply with the recommendations included in the report, points 15, 16, and 17, and where judges and prosecutors who are just trying to do their jobs are then criminalized themselves does not help to create an environment of trust in any special investigation group or if any of the findings that they would have. I will now give the floor to my colleague Marcela. Good morning, Madam President, members of the Commission, and representative of the state. I'm Ketty Marcelo Lopez. I am the president of the National Organization of Indigenous and Andean Women of Peru. We're here to report the crimes committed against our Quechua and Aymara brothers and sisters during the violent repression of the Baluarte administration in December of 2022 and January of 2023. We've been reporting this since the rule of law broke down, and there's been a de facto and enemy administration of indigenous peoples. We are called terrorists when we take to the streets to protest. Indigenous women have been permanently reporting these cases of discrimination and violence at the hands of the government, particularly when there is a development model based on extractive activities that condemns us to a slow death and destroys Mother Nature. It has been proven that this economic model submits us to conditions that undermines our spiritual and physical well-being. Between December of 2022 and January 2023, and it cannot be understood, the magnitude cannot be understood if we don't provide context and put it in the context of this genocidal economic model. And they collude with the private sector, the military, and media, and open signal media. And from UNIAP, despite the threats, persecution, and criminalization of our activities, those of us who are victims, we will continue to report and reject the coup d'etat, and that our authorities are trying to undermine the few democratic institutions that remain. Other autonomous institutions, including the Office of the Ombudsperson, are also subjected to this dictatorial regime. We wanted to call your attention and the Commission to everything that is happening at the hands of the police against indigenous leaders who have taken part in the social protests. The government, by criminalizing indigenous leaders, is criminalizing the entire community that person represents. We would like to reiterate to the Commission our request that an international commission be convened that will impartially investigate the crimes that have been committed against our Quechua and Aymara brothers and sisters. As we stated in our report that we have made available to the Executive Secretariat. This states that there are no guarantees in the justice system in Peru, and that is why we have to turn to the international community. We call upon the executive and legislative branches to stop passing laws that penalize indigenous communities and target us with discrimination and persecution. We also demand full reparations for the families of the victims who were murdered in the protest. We ask for the genocidal extractive activities policy to be repealed. I will now turn things over to Nelson Ortiz Espinosa.
Good morning to everyone. I wonder if we could ask President Roberta Clark for 2 extra minutes. I'm Nelson Espinosa, a university student, and I went to the emergency room December 15th with abdominal trauma and evisceration caused by a gunshot wound, and I had to have surgery at that regional hospital. I'm one of the survivors of the Ayacucho massacre of last December. I say survivor because we must understand that most of the wounds were gunshot wounds to the head, to the abdomen. They weren't just trying to frighten us or disperse us. They wanted to kill us. We must specify that in Ayacucho, there were at least 72 injured, Andahuayla 56, and Juliacama 250, according to official reports. But we estimate that the numbers were far higher. The by emergency decree, they've provided for some damages that were insufficient. Many of my fellow protesters didn't get any of that money, in fact, and what we did get had to be used to pay for our treatment or help our family members because they couldn't work. Raul Goya, he survived gunshots to the face, which destroyed his jaw. He had to go to Lima to be able to get medical treatment. He will have to have another surgery. Or Anderson Lapa from Ayacucho, who survived 3 gunshots that destroyed his jaw and shoulder. He had to get a bone graft to rebuild his jaw. Not only does he have metal in his shoulder now that causes all sorts of problems for him. We have Uripa Purima, who was shot in the back in November. The bullet lodged in his spine. He has to go to the hospital once a month in Lima to receive treatment. He missed out on a whole year of school, and he didn't get an excused absence from his professors or get accommodations to help him, given that he has to travel for medical reasons. Then we have the example of Nelson Colarde in Juliaca, who's immobilized owing to skull fracture. He lost 10 centimeters of bone, undermining his cerebral capacity. These are just a few of many, many cases of people who still have bullets and shot in their bodies still. We've had to wait for hours and hours for treatment. All of this affects our mental and physical health. And ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, all of this to say that the state has failed to heed the recommendations of the Commission. We wish to see a commission of medical professionals to review the situation of those who were injured and to ensure their rehabilitation and to provide monies for disability. There needs to be monitoring of the state that sees us through to the end. And now I'll give the floor to my fellow Dani. My colleague Dani. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate that you're receiving us. My name is Dali Rojas. I'm the parent of Deacon Romario Quispe, a young boy killed on November 11th. 49 people died that day. Young people, parents, families that were participating in protests or were just walking by when they were shot. Since that day, mothers, fathers, children, wives, husbands, brothers, all are now in a struggle for justice so that those responsible pay for what they did. There are many who are responsible, Dina Boluarte, military and police chiefs, but to this date there have been no judicial proceedings against them, just one preliminary investigation. In Andahuaylas, the investigation has not advanced because they keep switching out the prosecutors. So far, we've had 4 different prosecutors. We ask that we be heard in our language, in Quechua. As mothers and fathers speak up to demand justice, they speak only Quechua. But they won't listen to us unless we speak Spanish. As for those who lost their lives, this state gives 50,000 new soles in damages, but that doesn't make up for a lost life. There are widows, there are orphans, and what they need is a permanent stipend. Those killed in the various locations demand justice. We want the prosecutors to go to the scene of the crime. We don't want to have to go all the way to Lima. I had to come all the way here to speak for the families of those killed. We lost family members. You can't imagine the pain. We want children and young people to have a good life. We're traumatized. We would like support from the international organizations so that we can seek the truth. Nobody's worried or concerned for our mental health and all of this. We want to be heard. We want justice. We must bear in mind that they brutally killed people. Some of them were children. Thank you for hearing me. Now it's Raul's turn. Good morning, everyone. I am the brother Marco Antonio Sama, a biologist, internist, who was, in a cowardly way, shot in the back in the vicinity of the airport. Ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, given these serious human rights violations that we've seen across Peru perpetrated by the state, I speak to you to describe the current conditions experienced by the victims of this repression. After the 36 recommendations provided in the report, this human rights situation in Peru in the context of social protests, we regret to report that the process of justice is very distant from the victims. Many of my brothers and sisters are from villages that are far from the cities. Carabaya, places where there's no access. And unfortunately, they have to travel all the way to Juliaca and often all the way to Lima to give testimony. Justice for us is far, far away. There are many obstacles in our path. The prosecutor's office, after going on prosecutor number 5 right now, are asking us to pay 56 cents for every copy of documents. As you see, it's for those of us, many of whom are in extreme poverty, cannot afford this. Many of the people who were killed were low-income individuals, people who can barely meet their own basic needs. We victims feel that we are not on an equal footing. We are disadvantaged vis-a-vis President Dina Boluarte. We don't have resources. We can't travel all the way to Juliaca and then to Lima. 1,300 kilometers, that's about 800 miles. That's 26 hours by bus. I must discuss the state's policies. The state's institutions have been completely indifferent. There's no restitution of rights, no guarantees. On July 26, 28, 29, there was another case of repression. We traveled to Lima with families to demand that our files be returned, and we were gassed. And some leaders of our groups were even arrested. The state continues to be a perpetrator of discrimination against us. They're fostering polarization. They're denying historical memory. They're stigmatizing us as terrorists, as vandals, as criminals, without any evidence. None of the killings were in response to any kind of criminal background. None of the victims had a criminal background. They were people who led impeccable, unimpeachable lives. After the commissions provided by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the state began a process of political judicial persecution and a restriction of freedom of expression with illegal arbitrary detention, with cruel treatment by police agents who do not provide treatment with a gender perspective. Victims are from Quechua and Aymara and Chanca original peoples, like our brothers of Cuyo Grande in Cusco, who are being pressured to accept or acknowledge crimes of terrorism that they didn't commit, offering them or imposing fines of 250,000 soles for harm to the state. There are also intimidation and persecution of journalists who talk about our situation. The Peruvian state has made no effort to follow the recommendations of the Commission. We request that all mechanisms be activated as provided for in the Inter-American Charter. We want memory, justice, reparations, and a guarantee that there will be no repetition. We do not want to live through this again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, representatives of civil society. And we did grant you the extra 2 minutes as requested. And in that regard, I now call upon the state to make its presentation, and you too have the extra 2 minutes, so you will have 26 minutes. And if I can ask the colleagues to adjust the clock to 26 minutes. Thank you very much.
Señora Presidenta, por equidad, quisiéramos por favor solicitar a vuestra mesa que tenga en cuenta que los representantes de la sociedad civil han tomado 3 minutos y 40 segundos adicionales, los mismos que el Estado peruano solicita.
Oh, we would ask for the same consideration. It was actually 3 minutes and 40 seconds more, not 2 minutes more.
Thank you very much. Our is slightly different from yours, but Minister, we go with your counting, and we can make the adjustment as we go from the point of view of the Commission. We can reduce our time to accommodate equal time on both sides. So please do go ahead.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning. Distinguished members of the Commission, representatives of civil society, a good day to everyone. The Peruvian state comes to this hearing to report on progress made in implementing the recommendations of the Commission's report, and thus continue to demonstrate our commitment to respecting and guaranteeing human rights. According to your report of December 7, 2022, there was a coup d'etat. In this environment of widespread violence, acts of protest took place. According to human rights regulations, the Peruvian state guarantees the right to peaceful protest, but rejects acts of vandalism using violence through road closures, attempts to take over airports, or burn public buildings and private business establishments. As mentioned, by the President of the Republic. We regret the harm suffered by some people, both from civil society and from the armed forces and the police. We hope that similar situations will not be repeated. I must emphasize there is no, nor has there been, any government policy aimed at violating human rights. On the contrary, this administration has as its core guideline to fully respect, extend human rights through the country. Investigations are conducted by constitutionally autonomous organizations without interference from the government. In that context, this year, the government of Peru requested the visit of a high-level visit from the Commission, which took place January 11 and 13 of this year. We will now mention some of the actions related to the first point and recommendations 9, 13, and 14. The state, on its own initiative, provided care to 111 bereaved relatives of 63 deceased persons and 155 seriously injured persons with economic support of 50,000 soles per deceased person and 25,000 per seriously injured person. Likewise, some of these deceased persons include military and police personnel and people who, because of road closures, suffered because they couldn't get to the hospital on time. In one case, stones were thrown at an ambulance. Likewise, medical support and scholarships for the children of those affected were provided, and these individuals were included in social programs as well. The Public Defender's Office provided orientation in 112 cases and 12 sponsorships within the framework of social demonstrations, and the justice sector approved several norms and protocols. 12 specialized victim defense services will be open this year with an intercultural approach. In addition, for purposes of strengthening dialogue with the population, 7 dialogues have been held or will be held with human rights defenders in various parts of the country. There'll also be consultations in 5 different cities. Commissioners, I'd now like to give the floor to Claudia Fuentes, who represents the Ministry of Health. Thank you, Vice Minister. The Peruvian state, through the Ministry of Health, guarantees access and comprehensive health care with a centralized health system at the national level. Coverage is provided through the comprehensive health insurance free of charge, which provides preventive, recuperative, and rehabilitative care. This includes medical and health procedures and drug coverage. In the context of the social protests, the Peruvian state guaranteed and provided health care to those affected from December 2022 to March 2023, and 1,398 people registered. Based on the report and recommendations on the right to health, the following actions were carried out. With regard to recommendations 9C and 11C, the Ministry of Health, with a commitment to providing comprehensive care, adopted medical rehabilitation and psychological care measures, and through October, 1,717 cases of health care were provided. MINSA provides training to multidisciplinary teams in 97 community mental health centers located in the regions of Apurímac, Arequipa, Ayacucho, Ica, Junín, La Libertad, Lima, Puno, and San Martín. It has regional coordinators to strengthen the capacities of health personnel regarding the rights of persons affected, to ensure a proper approach to each case, and to provide differentiated care to people with mental health conditions. I should also note that in relation to alleged acts of discrimination, the Health Ministry is promoting in indigenous towns the implementation of cultural relevance in health facilities, primary care facilities, through the Directorate of Indigenous or Native Peoples. These activities have an intercultural approach and enable health personnel to address each area of health. Since 2019, we have 37 health facilities that are qualified now as culturally relevant health facilities that serve the people of Awajún, Awayam, Pampis, Aymara, Quechua, Shipibo, Conibo, Ashaninka, and others. Regarding the fight against impunity, the ministry, in order to improve follow-up and monitoring of people whose health has been affected, is developing an application that allows for recording and systematizing data on those injured and deceased. And that will be consolidated by the Emergency Operations Center of MINSA with interoperability with the database of the National ID and Civil Status Registry, the National Computerized System on Deaths, taking into account disaggregated data, complying with the parameters established in the Personal Data Protection Law. Likewise, we'd like to highlight the formation of a permanent working group created by ministerial resolution with the entities that make up the health system. This will contribute to the follow-up monitoring and accompaniment of health care for those affected. The ministry has been promoting different initiatives to strengthen its responsiveness in terms of infrastructure, equipment, and personnel at health facilities to build health capacity in the south of the country. And lastly, the Peruvian state, through the Ministry of Health, reaffirms its firm commitment to respect and guarantee the rights of citizens to access comprehensive health services in a timely and appropriate manner, as well as the efforts to continue implementing public health policies with a culturally relevant approach with emphasis on areas including indigenous and rural locales with gender and intersectionality and human rights that take into account individual harm.
And now I would like to give the floor to, from Lima, Marina Mendoza, representative of the Public Prosecutor's Office. Good morning, everyone. Before sharing with you some of the progress we've made in the Public Prosecutor's Office on the recommendations, please allow me to say to the people and organizations that we've had the opportunity to listen to and all those representing them that we understand the pain and regret generated by these events and that our sympathies are with you. I assure you that our work to clarify the facts and ensure this will never happen is firmly based on you and on every Peruvian's right to access and to representation in the justice system. I will now proceed to present some of the progress made on recommendations 9, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 36 of the Commission's report. First, the special team of prosecutors for cases involving victims during social protests has been created, which has national jurisdiction and exclusive authorization to investigate crimes committed against individuals and common crimes that have constituted cases of human rights violations. There's a specialized team of experts and a multidisciplinary team which includes psychologists to provide support protection to those affected. There are 47 case files open, which are in their preliminary stages. All 47 files are on schedule. 38 of them have been labeled complex cases. These case files include 50 deceased persons, 367 injured individuals, and 266 persons who were impacted by other crimes. The prosecutors on the special team have carried out more than 4,000 acts of investigation, including statements, inspections, expert opinions, reenactments, exhibits, seizures, ballistic evidence, and other processes. Moreover, the prosecutors have traveled and have been traveling to the areas where these events transpired. In other words, they have visited Ayacucho, Puno, Apurimac, Junín, Arequipa, Ucayali, Cusco, Ica, and La Libertad. In addition, the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Crime Prevention, Human Rights, and Multiculturalism, as well as the regular prosecutor's offices, have intervened before, during, and after the social protests of July 2023 in order to prevent crimes from being committed, and in cases where crimes have been committed, act promptly to conduct all necessary, urgent, and acts that cannot be postponed to investigate and get to the bottom of the case. The prosecutorial, forensic, and administrative personnel of the subsystem and of the specialized office have taken part in 24 training sessions on international standards for prosecutorial action in human rights cases with the technical assistance of national and international organizations like UNESCO, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights for Peru, and the Foreign Affairs Ministry. The Ministry of Economy and Finance authorized the transfer of payments. They resolved to create 29 provincial prosecutors' office and the creation of 216 permanent and temporary prosecutor offices. To date, 5 offices has been opened in the cities of Lambayeque, La Libertad, Ica, Cusco, Arequipa, as well as Lima, Ayacucho, Madre de Dios, Puno, Apurimac, Junín, and Ucayale. It was necessary to receive authorization from the Ministry of Economy and Finance to transfer 99,001,010 souls to finance the implementation of the new specialized prosecutors' offices, and also of the budget of 26,832,820 souls has been transferred to the Institute of Legal Medicine and Forensic Sciences. And this is to hire 462 professionals, doctors, anthropologists, archaeologists, and computer specialists, and purchase equipment and furniture, as well as supplies for the molecular biology and genetics laboratories. And the forensic medicine staff have received specialized training in application of the Istanbul Protocol. The Registry of Victims of Social Protest, which collects data on victims disaggregated by ethnicity, race, age, gender, and other variables, is being implemented and constantly updated. The Crime Observatory of the Public Prosecutor's Office has published bulletins on monitoring and institutional actions through which information is provided to the public regarding the public prosecutor's office actions in the context of the social protests. Another important piece of progress is that the prosecutors have arranged for affected persons who are part of the investigations to be brought into the program for protection and assistance to victims and witnesses through a district unit for protection and assistance to victims and witnesses, or an immediate assistance unit where they are provided with legal, psychological, and social support. In order to adopt the necessary measures to protect security and safety of its staff, the Public Prosecutor's Office and the Ministry of the Interior worked together to secure the different offices of the Public Prosecutor's offices that were attacked during the demonstrations. The prosecutors from the Public Prosecutor's Office in Peru, as defenders of legality, lawfulness, and rule of law, have taken on the task of thoroughly investigating the cases included in the report in strict compliance with international human rights standards. We reaffirm our commitment to carry out the investigations in an orderly fashion and in a speedy fashion. I thank you for the space, and I also thank the interpreters who allow us to communicate. And now I would like to give the floor to Aisa Tejada Fernandez, Director General of the Democratic Security Office of the Ministry of Interior. Thank you. The Ministry of the Interior, through the Peruvian National Police, has implemented a series of significant measures that are consistent with the recommendations of the Inter-American Commission aimed at strengthening police training, promoting citizen security, and respecting the human rights of all citizens in the context of social protest. In response to Recommendation 4, in May of this year, the National Police of Peru appointed a permanent coordinator for human rights and the use of force. This individual is responsible for supervising and ensuring that police training and operations are focused on preventing human rights violations, being a fundamental part of this strategy, the training of trainers in human rights and the use of force, with the technical assistance of the International Committee of the Red Cross. In July of 2023, a directive was issued entitled Guidelines for Strengthening the Capabilities of Police Personnel and the Use of Force, aimed at ongoing improvement with a human rights approach. This includes a virtual module and a methodological guide for instruction. Both were certified by the International Committee of the Red Cross. The aim is to provide a solid basis for training in human rights and the use of force, and to help ensure that police actions are more responsible and respectful in maintaining public order. The cooperation agreement between the Ministry of the Interior and the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is in its essence collaboration to promote international standards on the use of force and the protection of individuals, has allowed for the training of human rights instructors and implementation of workshops on after-action assessments and use of force. This is aimed at colonels and general officers of the Peruvian National Police in order to improve police response in situations of social protest. Regarding Recommendation 5, which calls for ensuring that the use of force is consistent with the principles of legality, necessity, and proportionality, the Ministry of the Interior has established a legal framework in accordance with international human rights standards based on Legislative Decree 1186, which regulates the use of force by the police. As part of our regulatory framework, in July 2023, the Directive for the Appropriate Use of Non-Lethal or Less Lethal Police Means and Police Operations for the Control and Maintenance and Restoration of Public Order was adopted. These measures aim to ensure that the police act with full respect for the human rights of all persons involved in social protests. As to Recommendation 6, regarding measures to exclude firearms in controlling social protests, the directive entitled Administrative and Operational Guidelines for the Planning, Conduct, and Execution of Police Operations for the Control, Maintenance, and Restoration of Public Order provides that police personnel should not use lethal firearms except when the person in question is creating a real and imminent danger of death and serious injury of police or third parties, and when extreme measures are insufficient or inadequate. With respect to Recommendation 7, the Constitutional Court has stated that public force is exclusive to the Peruvian National Police, except in exceptional situations provided for under the Constitution. In addition, the recent enactment of Law 31880 delegates to the executive branch the power to legislate in matters of citizen security, including amendment of the Peruvian National Police Act that will enable the creation of a Human Rights Directorate as a specialized police agency. The measures adopted by the Peruvian National Police in response to the recommendations of the Commission are an important step toward the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of social protests. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to Herbert Gary Rubio Alvarez, Director of Policy and Strategic Planning at the Ministry of Defense. The declaration of a state of emergency is a constitutional and legal instrument used by a democratic state to guarantee security and respect for the most basic rights. The Ministry of the Interior is responsible for assessing and recommending the issue of a state of emergency, which allows it to execute actions to alleviate a problem, and the National Police maintains control of internal order. The defense sector acts in accordance with the provisions of Legislative Decree 1095, which establishes the rules for the use of force by the armed forces and national territory, a rule that establishes the guiding principles of legality, necessity, and proportionality in the use of public law enforcement in accordance with the international standards of the Code of Conduct for Law Enforcement Officials and the basic principles for the use of force and firearms, respecting international human rights law. Likewise, there are rules for the use of force, the Joint Manual of Rules for Operational Conduct of the Armed Forces, and the Manual of Operational Law for the Armed Forces of Peru, which help in the planning, conduct, and evaluation of military operations and actions in Peru. With regard to Recommendation 24 on training programs, the Ministry of Defense has the Center for International Humanitarian Law, which since its creation in 2004 has been offering training courses in agreement with the International Committee on the Red Cross. Among them, basic, higher, and advanced programs on human rights and international humanitarian law, operational legal advisor program, and workshops in different regions of the country. And this has enabled the training of 6,472 members of the armed forces on the prohibition of torture, cruel treatment, lessons learned, and national and comparative case studies on the subject. The recommendation on the possible human rights violations are investigated by the Public Prosecutor's Office and does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Military Police Court. However, the Defense Ministry has continued to provide the necessary facilities for due process. Thank you very much. And to conclude this block, I would like to give the floor to Gustavo Orianzo Staya, and Vice Minister and Madam President, thank you. The state of Peru is once again before the Commission in a hearing, and here to talk about the progress and the implementation of the recommendations contained in last May's report. The delegation of the Peruvian state, as you can see, Madam President, represents many sectors and represent different sectors. And this reflects, Madam President, the importance that the state has given to this Commission hearing. It is an indication of our commitment to fully implement the recommendations contained in your report. Madam President, the report contains 36 recommendations, as well as valuable comments that I would like to recall now. The Commission has been emphatic in that in 2022 there was a coup d'etat perpetrated by Castillo and his accomplices. Madam President, this coup d'etat is what led to the acts of violence. And, Madam President, we saw very regrettable events transpire. As is well known, the breakdown in constitutional order warranted the repudiation from all agencies. Civil society also rejected it, as did the armed forces and the national police in Peru. Madam President, with the breakdown of the constitutional order, the Congress had its full right to take action and move toward constitutional succession in the person of Dina Boluarte. The report indicates very explicitly, Madam President, that the state of Peru acknowledges the right to peaceful protest. Unfortunately, however, there were acts of violence that are not protected by the right to protest. Also in your report, that in terms of what happened in December 2022 and January 2023, there were regrettable acts that transpired, many of them because of the blockades of the roads which prevented ambulances and fire trucks from getting to where they needed to, and this led to the deaths of many innocent Peruvians. The systematic takeover of airports at the same time in different regions shows a maneuver that was orchestrated by organizations that knew in advance about this assault to democracy in Peru. The Public Prosecutor's Office and the judiciary, police stations, and even private property were attacked, as well as public property. The Commission has recognized that the regrettable events that transpired took place in an environment of widespread violence, and unfortunately, there were dozens of deaths, and we are the first to express our regret about that. We express our solidarity with all of those in mourning. The Commission has determined that each of these events should be investigated by the competent authorities and should be done quickly and with absolute independence so that the circumstances can be clarified and the perpetrators can be identified, ensuring non-repetition. Madam President, it is absolutely important to indicate that the Commission considered these very specific cases, and we reject insinuation that this is there's a systematic policy of human rights violations. We firmly uphold our international commitments and our commitments within the inter-American system. That we can criticize respectfully some of the decisions of the Commission which we do not agree with, which has led to benefits for leaders of what we would consider terrorists and have offered precautionary measures to such individuals. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, representatives of the state. I know, under Ambassador, I did check on the time, and you are correct. So we did the adjustments on the time. Okay.
Señora Presidenta, solicitamos por favor que se llame a...
Madam President, we demand, or we respectfully request that you call order. Please call for order. The Peruvian state cannot allow this, Madam President. We cannot allow this.
The only persons registered with civil society will be allowed to speak. I'm not registered to
Señora
speak.
Presidenta, nosotros no podemos permitir que este suceso...
Madam President, we can't allow this to continue. The delegation of the Peruvian state will leave.
Ask the Commission to... Okay, so but...
Señora Presidenta...
Madam President, please. Seguridad, seguridad.
Yes. Can I ask security?
Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, on behalf of the victims, we request that these individuals be removed from the room.
Shame on you! You ambassador of integrity! You are lying! You are lying! Why are you lying? Why are you lying? Why are you lying? And this illegitimate
Señora.
husband, Dina Boluarte, needs to go.
Can we, security, can you...
Seguridad, por favor, pedimos que escolten a estos individuos.
Estúpidos, mentirosos, cobardes, tengan las pelotas para decir la verdad, digan la verdad nada más, estúpidos.
Señora Presidenta, por favor.
Madam President, please.
To respond to what we've heard from civil society and the state. Commissioner Bernal?
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to take the opportunity as this first statement from the Commission to please call for diplomacy and cordiality. This is a high-level diplomatic dialogue, and we cannot have expressions of violence or insults or anything outside the order of this context of formal dialogue. Events such as these are an opportunity for exchange and dialogue, not for yelling, accusing, making personal attacks or attacks against institutions. I wish to begin with that. Secondly, I would like to thank the Inter-American Commission, the Executive Secretariat team for organizing this, and thank you to the petitioners from civil society for traveling all the way to Washington to present their arguments. And then thank you as well to the high-level delegation from the Peruvian state that also had to travel this far. And thank you to those who connected remotely as well. As you've seen throughout this week, there have been hearings where the state hasn't even appeared at all. Here we do see a state committed to dialogue. That's something that I can observe as a commissioner. To have 2 deputy ministers, an ambassador, and multiple officials connecting from Lima. And so I do call upon civil society and everyone else to appreciate that the government is attaching importance to this hearing. The objective of this hearing is not to find fault or responsibility or to assess or process specific claims or issues or precautionary measures. There are special proceedings for those purposes in the inter-American system. The purpose of this hearing is to foster dialogue between the petitioners and the state. And in that vein, I wish to begin first by reaffirming the good faith of the petitioners who have come here with reports that are important from a human rights perspective, and also the good faith shown by the state in providing information. I have not seen all the documents yet. I didn't have time to read what was sent. I understand that they were sent late last night. I regret I did not have time to review them, but based on what was presented orally today, they show that there's not a structural policy to persecute those who exercise their freedom of expression right to protest. And in the context of the events that gave rise to this hearing, the government has taken measures to seek justice, truth, reparations, and a guarantee of non-repetition. There are criminal investigations underway. There are training programs for law enforcement. I'd like to say that this is not the first country of the region in which events such as these have taken place. And over time, governments are adapting their practices to lift the standards in terms of human rights and respect, therefore, in the context of protests. In work that I presented as an academic,
so we can
Yo doy cuenta de la problemática.
Yes, well, I address the serious problems that arise in situations such as these, where on the one hand you must protect freedom of expression and the right to protest, but on the other hand, a government also has the obligation to protect the lives of others and to ensure public order and the property of the state. So the state is between a rock and a hard place in that regard. Thank you.
Commissioner Bernal, but we have lost time. Can I ask Executive Secretary Ranon to make her comments, and mindful that of our time?
Sí, muchas gracias, Presidenta Clark, y muy buenos días.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning to the illustrious representation of the state and to the representatives of civil society. The Commission was there in the past, and the Commission, with its report after its visits, has set forth recommendations and a way forward, and has marked a historic process of establishing what happened. The Commission, with regard to the situation in Peru, has put out a report that marks a historical process. There is a list with all the victims that ought to receive reparations. I do thank the state for all the information sent after business hours last night, so we weren't able to read it thoroughly for obvious reasons. But we do recall that the last paragraph of the report opens the door to establishing a follow-up mechanism. And that follow-up mechanism ought to be based on 2 or 3 principles. First, open communication between the Commission, the state, and civil society. We cannot speak of fulfilling obligations unless the individuals seated here today do not feel that they've been made whole. These should be based on full knowledge of implementation of the recommendations at a tripartite level, and a follow-up mechanism, we believe, should also open the way to dialogue, open dialogue, continuous dialogue between civil society and the state. And the last paragraph of the report states this rather clearly, and we would reiterate to the state of Peru that we are available to help implement paragraph 296. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is at the disposal to the state to provide technical assistance for purposes of implementing the recommendations set forth in this report, including the establishment of a special follow-up mechanism. Thank you for the August meeting, but we do need to start establishing a mechanism that will provide for transparency, ensure that people across the political spectrum can feel that there is a guarantee of no repetition. Thank you, President Clark.
And with you, Special Rapporteur.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. En atención al tiempo, muy brevemente.
Thank you. Given the time constraints, I would just like to quickly thank the civil society and state delegations for their presence here. There have been complaints here of justice being too distant. What can be done to make the justice system investigations become more available to civil society? And I would ask civil society, what are the challenges that you face in terms of support, international, national, local support, and what? And I would be interested to know whether the state could provide such support. There are various paragraphs discussing this in the report. The concern of the Commission and the rapporteurship has to do with stigmatization of protests. In that regard, I'd like to ask the state whether measures have been taken to avoid or to keep official statements from doing this, and ask civil society whether you are hearing stigmatization from officials. You mentioned journalists being persecuted, we would appreciate written material on that. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
To representatives of civil society and to the state. I want to address two issues, one the fight against impunity and the other one the reparations. There is I discern a difference of opinion between civil society and the state on what has been happening in relation to the investigations, the criminal investigations. On one hand, the state is saying we have moved promptly, we have a number of active files open. On the other hand, civil society organizations are saying we want the truth and we don't think the investigations are moving along as promptly as they should. And not only that, but there may be arrangements in the investigation that disadvantage victims and their families. So, for example, the question of travel to prosecutors rather than prosecutors traveling to the victims, the question of the cost of documentation, the question of changing prosecutors and the discontinuity. These are some of the complaints of civil society organizations. And so I want to ask the representatives of the state, having regard to what you are hearing now, and I'm sure you've heard it before, are there possibilities for adjustments in relation to the investigation process? And also, what is your state of thinking on the recommendation to establish an independent mechanism? On the question of reparations, the Commission has called for a comprehensive approach to reparations. I want to acknowledge Nelson, who is here, who gave his story, one of the persons who suffered from the gunshot wounds. And what we're hearing is that the reparations that have been received not all victims have received reparations, and also that the reparations have not taken into account the needs of families of those who have been killed or seriously harmed and will suffer disability for the rest of their life. And so my question of the state is, does the state have any further plans to approach the reparations in a more comprehensive approach, and an approach that would take account of the needs of families, particularly those of victims who have children? Thank you very much. And now to adjust the time, I'm so sorry, civil society, you now have 9 minutes instead of 12, and similarly the state will have 9 minutes instead of 12.
Muchísimas gracias, honorables.
Thank you very much to the illustrious members of the Commission. I will very briefly make reference first to the lack of state response to requests from members of civil society, but the recommendations themselves of the Commission with regard to democratic institutions. The Commission called upon strengthening the independence of the judiciary and the electoral system. Those recommendations have not been taken into account, and worse still, the situation has even worsened in terms of the democratic system, with attacks on the Council for Justice, attacks on prosecutors under the head of the previous Attorney General, and also proceedings against anti-corruption prosecutors. I'd also like to refer to the importance of creating this follow-up mechanism. Just a few weeks ago, before the Permanent Council of the OAS, the state said it was committed to human rights. If that is so, this is the time then therefore to accept this mechanism, and an independent interdisciplinary group of experts that could follow up, monitor this situation, not only with respect to human rights, but also the weakening of democratic institutions. We need transparency, access to public information, and periodic visits from the Commission. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We welcome the initiative of the Commission with regard to the creation of this mechanism. We would emphasize what is happening with prosecutors' offices. We need a prosecutor in every district, but we need to also strengthen the human rights. You can't have such turnover amongst the prosecutors that are investigating the facts of the massacres in Ayacucho and Juliaca. They need to respect social protests, yes, but they need to be strengthened so the investigations can proceed, so that people have true access to justice. As Raul Samillan noted, the public prosecutor's office has even charged people. 50 cents per scanned sheet for documents. That shouldn't happen. And with regard to what the Ministry of the Interior said, the issue isn't necessarily creating more protocols, because that doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. There needs to be oversight of the enforcement of those protocols, because protocols on police intervention are one thing, but we see shots to the head, to the chest. That shouldn't happen. Thank you. We have a state that governs with over 80 killings having happened already. And we, the indigenous, are not called indigenous. We're called terrorists. We live with that stigma. And dialogues don't resolve serious structural problems that we face day in, day out as indigenous peoples. Today in Peru, we are backsliding in terms of human rights and indigenous peoples' rights. As regards the political and social crisis in Peru, indigenous women believe that the acts committed by Dino Boluarte, according to the doctrine and jurisprudence of international law, we believe the state is guilty of crimes against humanity. Nothing will return our people's lives, and we will continue to demand justice. Thank you. Commissioners of the IACHR, I am here speaking on behalf of those who died and were wounded, and their widows, their orphans. We ask that you help us now in our efforts to achieve justice so that we don't see things dragging on for 30 or 40 years as it's happened in other places. We want to see our families made whole after such sadness and pain. We want to highlight what the ambassador said. The reality is different. There's stigma when you call us terrorists. That makes health officials have prejudice against us and in their treatment of us. How are you going to justify military people shooting at us at point-blank range? How does that make sense?
Thank you. They show us no respect. They kill us for whatever reason they want, like we're animals. My dear son was murdered. The police murder us as if we were nothing. They do not respect us. I would like to remind the Minister of Health that none of my brothers was given the rehabilitation they needed after they were wounded. There's no record of that. There were 80 people wounded, and not a single one has received any sort of treatment. My brother remains in bed, cannot move. As in terms of what the ambassador said, saying that we were part of this coup d'etat, I say to him and I say to everyone here that these are children who were nowhere near the airport. They're the ones who were killed. This is something that you have to keep in mind. What we have experienced, we were there, and the prosecutors' offices have to go to where these events transpired. They cannot continue to abuse us psychologically, requiring us to go to Lima to give our statement. The specialized team, when it came to the city of Cuyacao, it came without any paper. They didn't bring printers. We had to give them a table so that they could, and they didn't have a printer so that they could print out the records. Where are those millions of soles that were budgeted for these investigations? The Human Rights Prosecutor's Office, when it was created, it was empty. There wasn't even a chair in there. Over time, they started to equip it, but that is what's happening. There are millions and millions of soles out there, but we don't know where they're being spent. If you'll allow me, in the seconds that remain, I wanted to reiterate on behalf of the organization that we do not support what happened here in the hearing earlier. We believe in decorum and respect.
Indication. I now turn over to representatives of the state.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. We have taken note of all of the statements made by civil society. We recognize that the representatives here from civil society come in a spirit of dialogue, and that is what brings us together today. In that regard, I would like to give the floor to our Vice Minister of Culture. Good morning, and good morning to everyone here. From the leadership of the Ministry of Culture and the construction of an intercultural state that guarantees the rights of indigenous peoples and the Afro-Peruvian people, a series of actions have been carried out to comply with the recommendations of this Honorable Commission. With regard to recommendation 1, we have been promoting multiple actions of genuine dialogue with an intercultural and territorial approach. And we are hoping that this will lead to transformations that will prevent such complex scenarios from transpiring again. Along these lines, we've been promoting the incorporation of indigenous and Afro-Peruvian organizations in high-level spaces such as the National Agreement Forum. This is important opportunity for dialogue and consensus building so that they can participate in the discussion and ensure that their proposals are taken into account. We have been strengthening 2 areas that the executive has with indigenous peoples to ensure that we can work on the agendas to ensure respect for rights. As to recommendation 3, and understanding that ethnic racial discrimination is historical, cultural, and structural problem which merits the adoption of urgent measures to promote cultural diversity and prevent, eradicate, and punish any type of ethnic racial discrimination. Likewise, the Peru Without Racism strategy has been being implemented. There are 22 proposed ordinances for regional governments to ensure the effective respect for and exercise of the rights of people. We have created a service called Orienta. This is a mechanism for timely addressing any reports of ethnic racial discrimination. The support is free of charge. In terms of capacity building, we have courses, for example, one called Let's Talk About Racism, the ABCs of Multiculturalism. The idea is to raise awareness among students, educators, healthcare professionals, and the national police in order to engage in preventive actions. We understand the role of the media in helping to build a multicultural society, but also to fight against ethnic racial discrimination, have journalism free of discrimination, which is a tool that provides guidelines for treating information referring to indigenous and Afro-Peruvian people. And the national policy for the Afro-Peruvian people to 2030 was adopted, the purpose of which is to guarantee the political, economic, social, and cultural rights of these peoples. In terms of languages, we have made a more robust national registry of interpreters and translators of indigenous languages. With 696 interpreters and translators nationwide, we want to ensure the linguistic rights of indigenous peoples. And from the Ministry of Culture, we reaffirm our commitment to continue joining efforts to build a multicultural state free of ethnic and racial discrimination. We now have the Minister of Justice, Eduardo Rana, as well as the representative of the Supreme Court, who is also joining us from Lima. Madeleine Espinosa, who is an advisor to the presidency and the Council of Ministers. Good morning. As to the recommendations adopted by the Office of the President of the Council of Ministers, I would like to report the following. In December and January, the social protests of this year, the Office of the President of Council of Ministers has implemented a strategy to promote the sincere and ongoing dialogue in all departments of the country, making the most of the installed capacity in these various events, which were executed by teams of the dialogue and management offices. The objective was to identify the demands of the various communities and authorities in order to prioritize attention thereto. Between January and September 2023, 1,523 meetings were held, and there was intergovernmental and cross-sector work. This has allowed us to considerably reduce levels of social conflict. Moreover, civic actions were undertaken to address the needs of citizens in the departments of Puno, Junín, and Cusco, providing medical services as well as information on the various programs and services available. Since February, we have been holding multi-sectoral meetings with heads of dialogue in the offices of the executive branch in order to share information on social conflict and imminent risk. In August, there were technical assistance and capacity building workshops held for 25 regional governments and 18 sectors of the executive branch to disseminate tools for preventing and managing social conflicts in an effort to lend sustainability to the work of the different levels of government through prevention-related actions that prioritize participatory dialogue to meet the needs of the public. Moreover, in response to the first recommendation contained in the report from the Office of the President of the Council of Ministers in order to continue through a preventive approach through social dialogue, a cross-sector meeting was held in August to gather information within the context of designing and drafting a national policy for prevention and management of social conflicts. Thank you. We also need to respond to the main concern about investigations. So I wanted to turn the floor over to our colleague in Lima. Thank you, Madam President. I would like to respond to your questions on the point of those who are affected have to travel to make their statements. I wanted to emphasize that it is the prosecutors who are the ones who have traveled to the area, the scenes, and they have done this based on their nationwide jurisdiction. Moreover, these prosecutors are conducting their investigations using an intersectional and gender approach, one that is intercultural and comprehensive. What is more, there is a protocol for providing special attention to human rights defenders. In terms of the payment for copies, information can be accessed virtually at the request of the parties or their representatives, those who have been duly accredited in each of the investigations. The creation of special prosecutors' offices in the different regions of Peru is part of the state's compliance with the recommendations contained in the Commission's report. We have strengthened the team of prosecutors, the ECAVIV, who are investigating the cases of victims. There are 9 provincial prosecutors, 32 provincial, and they have teams of experts and psychologists to support their work. Thank you. If you'll allow me just to wrap up, just a few words. We sincerely regret what happened and say, Madam President, that we not all of the members of our delegation have been able to participate, but we will provide you all of the official documentation we have that will certify everything that we stated during this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and we do note the beginning of the documentation. So it's just left for me to close this this hearing. When human rights have been violated, persons who are most affected by those violations feel aggrieved, and they're deeply affected for the rest of their lives. And often all they have left is their voice, their freedom of expression, to insist on justice. I want to therefore thank the civil society organizations that were registered to participate here for their engagement in this dialogue. And I also want to thank the state for its high-level participation, which indicates its intention to pay close attention to the recommendations of the Commission and to address them. We acknowledge the indications of actions that have been taken already to implement the recommendations. And I want to assure you, Ambassador and representative of the state, that the Commission is here to continue to provide technical advisory services to support the implementation of these recommendations. And with that, I bring this hearing to a close, and I thank everyone.